I really thought that I was, going to do very well. But my first year was a disaster. And it was bad because I honestly did not know what working meant in a corporate environment.
What is your relationship with the manager? What should a young professional expect from the manager?
There are three relationships in your life that you don't get to pick. One of them is your manager. This is your single most important relationship at work. A good relationship with your manager, and good doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be best friends. A good relationship is one where you are getting all these four elements, which is the goal setting, the teaching, the feedback, and then access to resources, whether it is people or money or time or whatever. You cannot wait for them to become whatever version that works for you. You adapt. So that in the case of the manager, you get these four things from them. And hence the onus is on you to make it work.
Welcome to the Career Starter Kit. My guest today is Priyamvada Srivastav, a certified leadership coach who built a powerhouse 2-decade career at Procter & Gamble across India, Singapore and Vietnam, where she rose to Vice President and Country Manager. In this episode, Priya gets real about her early career, including why her first year at P&G was a disaster and how that one tough year rewired the way that she worked for the next 20. Priya also shares the 3 habits she saw in fast-track new hires while leading onboarding at P&G. If you're transitioning from student life to working life, or if your career hasn't started the way you hope, or if you're trying to find your rhythm with your manager, this episode is for you. In today's Career Clinic, Priya answers your biggest questions about working with your manager, including the ways of working chat that every new hire should have, the 3-bucket method for giving smart updates, how to take tough feedback and actually grow from it, how to ace leadership reviews, and why your manager is one of the 3 people in your life that you don't get to choose, and what to do about it. If you enjoy this episode, do follow on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. It really helps support the podcast and ensures that you don't miss what's next. Let's dive in. Here's Priyamvada Srivastav in her own words.
I am not a standard B school graduate. I always introduced myself so even within P&G. I did my master's in economics, and up until the first year of the master's degree was very much keen on joining academia. And then somewhere along the line, I realized that no, my passion lies elsewhere. Maybe academia is not made for me. P&G was one of 2 profiles on campus that had nothing to do with economics. So P&G happened to me by chance because I was just looking for a way out of economics at that point in time. And this profile of sales in P&G seemed like about as far away from anything to do with economics as I understood it on campus. So that's how P&G happened to me. I started my career in sales in P&G in India, and I was in Delhi, which was an interesting place to start in sales. I had a tumultuous start to my career, not a very happy one, but I guess all good given that I did last there for 2 decades.
Actually, it's really interesting to hear about one, you were interested in academia and then moved to sales, which are, I guess, as opposite end of the poles as you can get. And second, because I knew you when you were at least, I think, a decade into your career. When you tell me that you had not the easiest start, it's very difficult for me to believe it, right? Because I've seen you on the other side of things. So I'm curious to hear about both. Tell me whichever you want to speak to first. So one is, how did you know academia is not for you and how did you find your way here? And then of course your early learnings.
Why I didn't want academia was very clear. I couldn't imagine myself studying more and more of what I was being taught. It was about as simple as that. I had done an internship, and I think that's probably one of the best ways to test whether you really like that field or not. So I joined the economic research wing of a bank where I had to churn out a report over the 2 months that I was there, had some field work, etc., as well. After 2 weeks of the 8 that I was supposed to spend there, I was bored out of my mind. They offered me a pre-placement offer, and I was like, oh my goodness, please don't do this. I don't even know how to say no, but I cannot imagine myself doing this for the rest of my life. For me, it was easy. I don't know if it's the case with everyone, but listening to your own heart sometimes is perhaps the best advice that I can think of. After I did that, I started scouring the world for, okay, who comes on campus and what are the profiles that I can actually, enjoy. So I spent some time talking to the alumni from campus. Thankfully, P&G had recruited a few people just the previous year, so the folks that I was quite close with. And then it sounded fun. Maybe it sounded fun because it was so different from what I had imagined my life to be at until that point, but it sounded more exciting, more real world, more to do economics, at least on campus, sounded so theoretical that I was like, oh my god, just far away far away from it. And then I started to do a bit of research in terms of figuring out that what does PNG look for in their candidates. So I was very systematic from there onwards, because there were only two profiles. There was Hindustan Unilever at that point in time. HUL and PNG were the only two profiles that had nothing to do with economics. And Hindustan Lever unfortunately hadn't recruited anyone for the last 2-3 years from campus. Ours was an economics, Delhi School of Economics was for economists, right? So I couldn't find anyone in Hindustan Lever, but PNG I did. And I started asking them, what do you do? And then I went after everything that they told me. I used to feel like, I'd rigged the interview because I knew exactly what they were going to ask me. So I participated in a whole bunch of things that gave me real life experiences, leadership experience, working in teams, the usual stuff that they were going to ask me. Then everything became a bit easy in the interview because these were all lived experiences, right? So when they asked me, have you ever led a team? I was like, oh, not once, several times. I had enough stories. So the stories just came out very naturally. I'm talkative by nature, so it was easier that way. Once I knew what I wanted, spoke with the alumni, found out how the interview selection process happens, made an effort to make sure that my profile kind of fit well into it. And that's how I got into PNG. In fact, PNG even had that aptitude test, and I hadn't taken an aptitude test in a really, really long time. So I actually sat down to study. I was like, oh no, I can't flunk this. It's very basic, but suddenly when you're doing econometrics, you have kind of forgotten some of the basic aptitude test stuff. So I was like, I'm not taking any chances. People were looking at me like, you're out of your mind. I was like, this is preservation, self-preservation. If I don't do this, I'm going to get picked up by a bank, and then my life as I know it will end. So this was like self-preservation driving me headfirst towards PNG sales.
I love that level of preparation, and that speaks to what I know of you. But here, so you did like a 180 turn from economics to sales. What was those earlier years like? Was it everything that you expected?
Yes and no. So definitely it was so dynamic, and sales, right? I mean, I landed there and I was working store to store. It was like about as real life as it could get, and it was nothing theoretical about anything. If you sold stuff, you made the numbers for the day, the week, whatever. And you know that we run as actual salespeople for a couple of months, etc., etc. So in that form, it was everything that I had imagined it to be. But when I say it wasn't quite what I'd imagined, was that I expected myself to do really well. I had been doing well academically. I was one of 3 people who was selected from campus. It's a very small number of people selected. So I really thought that I was, going to do very well. But my first year was a disaster. I think the only reason they did not give me the worst rating possible is because the first year is a default rated. And I have never been more thankful for the concept of default rating that 1 year. So yeah, it was quite bad. And it was bad because I honestly did not know what working meant in a corporate environment. Like, I knew studying, I knew how to take exams, I knew how to ace when you have a curriculum that is well defined. But I didn't know what work really meant. Like, I had a target and I was like, okay, I'm making my way through to the target. I mean, usually there is some context, right? And I wasn't hitting my numbers, but I was like, there is a logical explanation. The maths adds up. I've done everything needed, but I'm not getting there. That was the first thing, which is, I was like, I have an explanation, so this should be okay, which is typically a very student thing to do, right? You have a curriculum and you're like, oh, my teacher didn't teach me anything, so I'm not expected to know this anymore. So that was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 was, I think that was my first and such an important lesson. I don't think I ever forgot that. Was that I never bothered to have like a alignment, agreement discussion with my manager. So there is a number, there is a target, and in sales that's easy. But there are a whole bunch of things of how you are going to get there. The how part, when should I do it, how should I do it, I never did that. I just assume that I have a number and I just need to make sure that I get there, and then I will figure my way out. Call it being naive or whatever, but that's how I kind of approached it. And not only did I not have an agreement with him, I never bothered to get a feedback until the final feedback for the year. I mean, I'm sure for people who work, when they hear it, will sound absolutely insane. But for me, I was like, if he has to tell me something, he'll tell me. He did tell me at the end of the year. And I think these were the 2 primary reasons. And he was a very nice guy, smart and teaching me things. And I was doing my bit, I thought, well, but basically had no agreement with him in any form, either on the goals or how I was progressing against those goals. At the end of the year, that thing came as a shock, which it shouldn't have. But it left me with that one important lesson, which is for my entire career. And I think life in general. I'm never ever getting into any sort of an assignment, role, responsibility without having absolute clarity about what am I expected to do, by when, and have an absolutely clear, drumbeat for getting feedback on how am I doing. Am I doing okay? Not doing okay. In fact, so much so that family has now started to ask me that you don't need to do this with us. But yeah, so bad start, but maybe not a bad start. If I hadn't had that bad a start, I had never learned this, and I think it did me a world of good.
Yeah, and I can absolutely relate to all of the points that you said, right? Which is like setting goals, taking feedback, alignment with the manager. Because I think you're right. I remember that when I transitioned from being a student to working, you kind of carry that template of school or college, right? Which is you have an end of the term exam and that's when you're evaluated. But that's not how business works. So now there's quite a few themes here. You've mentioned how like getting clarity is super important, getting feedback is super important. I think there's also just a broader theme of what is your relationship with the manager, right? Because at least for me, I remember the first time I had a manager, I felt like, okay, I have not had this kind of a, person in my life where you're kind of accountable to them, but they're not your teacher. They're not there to evaluate you. How did you learn? And now that you've been a manager, right, how do you kind of think of the relationship between a young professional and a manager? What should a young professional expect from the manager? Any kind of recommendations on how they establish that rapport?
As I reflect back on my first, encounter with a manager, similar feelings as you, right? Like I had no idea what this person was supposed to be. I ended up treating it like a friendship, which probably is not the best starting point. Your manager is somewhere between a guide who's friendly to you or a teacher who's not too bad. Like depending on, the two extremes of the individual characteristics of the manager. They're definitely a guide or a teacher, right? Because they're supposed to give you the goals and direction, and they're supposed to provide you with the necessary skills to be able to get there. That's why they are a manager. An excellent manager is one who's doing this really well, setting goals, giving you the necessary skills to be able to achieve those goals, is giving you feedback to tell you that you're doing this right and not doing this right, is also, kind of guiding you towards other resources that can help you deliver whatever objectives they've set for you, etc. Right? So that's what an ideal manager is supposed to be doing. Now I know that after years and years of experience. But then what this essentially means is that a successful career means you having, this is your single most important relationship at work, more important than anything else. A good relationship with your manager, and good doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be best friends. A good relationship is one where you are getting all these four elements, which is the goal setting, the teaching, the feedback, and then access to resources, whether it is people or money or time or whatever. Cherry on top will be if you actually have a good relationship where they personally care for you. But I mean, I'm not too fussed on that. It's okay if it is not there, but at least you should be getting these four things right. It's a very, very important relationship, and the onus is on you to make that work. Because one of these other gems that I got from one of my managers, and he said that, that there are three relationships in your life that you don't get to pick. And hence the onus is on you to make it work. One of them is your manager, the second are your parents, and the third one is your customer. So this was told to me in the context of, me complaining about a customer saying he's such an idiot. He doesn't understand anything. So I got this as feedback saying you don't get to change this. So it is your responsibility. You cannot wait for them to become whatever version that works for you. You adapt so that you get these four things. In the case of the manager, you get these four things from them. Onus is on you. Now, how do you make it work is a bit of an art. I guess it comes with experience on how to position those questions. But in my head, the way I made it work was simply by keeping it in these four buckets, which is that I'll make sure that I have the conversation as soon as is possible on, what are your expectations? This is what I think are the business goals. Are you okay with these? The second one saying that I know this, I don't know this. Can you teach me? Can you tell me who to go to be able to learn whatever is required? And then a steady drumbeat, monthly, quarterly, of seeking feedback saying, am I okay, not okay? If everything's fine, perfect, we all go home to the next day. If it's not fine, what's not fine? What should I change? So I drove that discussion very deliberately and like a steady drumbeat always. And then depending on the relationship, it became easier. So sometimes, I mean, it's chemistry at the end of the day, a relationship between two people. Even at work, it works the same way. If it works well, then all of these discussions are very transparent and you just know how things are. I've also had managers who've pretty much said, okay, fine, you write your own year-end assessment, I'll sign it off. Right? But what it has done is that aside from that first year, I have never had a surprise at the end of the year. Whether it was a good year or a bad year, I knew where it was headed. Not sure if it answered what you were.
No, absolutely. And I think that point about surprise is super valuable because sometimes you're almost hesitant to hear the bad news. But the point is, once you hear it, you can do something about it. Pretending that it doesn't exist doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just not reaching you.
So true, so true. In fact, like I said, my first year was bad, but it transformed my attitude towards work and how I work with managers. I've had similar troughs for sure in my career, at least two or three that I can remember very clearly. But at each of them, I always had managers who were very straight with me and told me, this is what you're not good at, or this is what you're not doing. And giving me that straight talk, that straight feedback, like I'm always thankful to them because it told me exactly what needs to change. Obviously, what worked in each of those instances was that there was a deep level of trust that I had on them, each of these managers. And there were definitely two who gave me very bad news at different parts of my career. But because I had so much trust, I accepted the feedback. I mean, I felt bad for like maybe a minute or 30 depending on how bad the feedback was. Definitely I felt bad. It hits you when somebody tells you that you're not good at something. But then I quickly switched to saying that okay, I'm going to do better. Here is what I'm thinking. What do you think of the plan? That ability to make sure that you take feedback without getting defensive, super important. Two things that always struck me, right? That one, it will be very strange if you have a bump free ride in your entire, and probably not the best because it means that you didn't get any hard messages, and I don't think any of us are born perfect to work. So you'll never have a bump free ride. You should aim for it. I mean, not aim, but you should hope that you get at least a few bad news because it is giving you an opportunity to get better. And the second one is being open to feedback. Like I almost got to a point where I used to tell my managers that I'm telling you, you don't need to waste your time trying to sugarcoat your feedback. I will feel bad when you tell me the first time, but I will get over it. But I really value sincere feedback. And this used to be my opening dialogue after about, I think, 7-8 years of working, where I said that give it to me straight, don't waste time. If you see me do something which is not okay, tell me right then. And obviously, I then followed it up with my team as I became a people manager as well. The best thing you can do for your people to grow is to make sure that you give them timely and constructive feedback.
Absolutely. And actually, you've kind of answered the question I was going to ask, but let me ask anyways in case there's more there, which is, let's say I do want feedback, but what I'm hearing is either sugar coated or not actionable or even very tactically, right? A lot of times managers are busy. So like, let's say I set up a one-on-one and it keeps getting postponed. How do I actually make sure that I get the feedback and that it's actionable for me? Now you've mentioned one point of just explicitly saying it, and I think that helps. But anything else there?
I think having a drumbeat is helpful because it is not possible for the manager to be like constantly unavailable. Like you plan unless the manager is deliberately avoiding, which by the way is also a signal. If your manager doesn't want to talk to you and is not, I mean, because you can end up having not so good managers, right, who avoid these negative messages, etc. Like nobody will avoid having a conversation with you on how you're doing if they had good news to tell you. So if somebody is just constantly saying that okay, we'll talk, and that when we'll talk never happens, that's your cue that there is no good news coming this way. And that's a safe assumption to make. In those circumstances, you may need to reach out to somebody else. It can be other stakeholders who you worked with to kind of get feedback, which your manager is not seeking. In worst case scenarios, you may want to go to HR and say that, it will be helpful if I just get some word out of it. But persistence pays, and then just staying open to cues, like if somebody doesn't want to talk to you, I think would be maybe my guess. The other one, like I said, is to keep your mind open. The sugarcoating. So for example, if somebody is sugarcoating, right? We're all intelligent enough to understand that someone is saying, you're doing well, but if the intent of that conversation is that you want to hear constructive feedback, then focus your energies on the but. Like, okay, thank you so much for all the good words that you said, but you also mentioned XYZ. Can you just elaborate a little bit more? So you get to the heart, and I think what those statements do for managers is that, I mean, we may not realize it, but being a manager is not an easy job. It's not an easy job to go and tell people that, you didn't do well. No one likes to do that. But when you make them feel at ease that you're going to be okay even if they give you bad news, then you're making your boss's job easier, and then she's going to be more comfortable telling you whatever. In that specific instance, when you see that there's a sandwich feedback where somebody said, oh, you're doing all of this well, but XYZ, and you said, thank you so much, tell me what can I do, like this part, can you elaborate? But then there you'll see them dive straight into telling you what didn't work. So be open and understand that the purpose of this conversation is not a ego boost for you. The purpose of this conversation is literally to tell you how can you be better.
Makes absolute sense, right? Because I think, like you mentioned, it is difficult to give feedback. The manager is also scared of hurting feelings or impacting the relationship, so kind of signaling that, but that's actually what will be helpful. I'm going to switch gears now. Like I mentioned at the top, I think one of the reasons I was so excited about this is because you have led P&G's onboarding program for the sales and the CBD organization for a few years. You were leading that when I joined. So you have your personal experience, but also you've seen these kind of batches of new hires join. I wonder if there's some observations from that. Like, what were the skills that differentiated folks who did well in the beginning? What were the most valuable skills for folks in those early years?
No, definitely. I think a few things kind of struck me almost immediately in that assignment, but even later on. I think the first one was just so people who put in the hours in field almost always, which is like they spend time not on their laptops inside offices, but were there with the salesman, with the van, with the inside the store. They just learned stuff much faster. The version may be different for different functions, but it basically means that don't spend too much time intellectualizing over Excel sheet unless that's your job description. Spend time where the consumer is, spend time when your customer is, spend time in the warehouse if you're in supply chain or in the factory floor, because that's where you learn the most, the nitty-gritties, the practical aspect. That was one. Folks who did well were the ones who were very deliberate about spending and prioritizing time being in trade. I think the second one was just the attitude aspect, which was curiosity. Like they were constantly curious about everything, whether it was what does it take to become successful? How do I do this better? I mean, they would seek out people with experience, and some were very focused on saying that, okay, I want to get to this level or this job, so I just want to know how to get there. Others was more subtle, whereby saying that, no, I'm not quite sure how to solve this problem, but I'd like to hear how you would have done it or how did you do it. So curiosity to kind of learn, I think, would be the second one. And I think the third one was just being organized, structured in your approach of how you manage your day. Make sure that you're not, missing deadlines for, basic hygiene stuff almost. Because one sets you apart a little bit. Actually, the reverse. If you start to not have the basic hygiene stuff, you just set off a very bad impression very early on, and then it takes years of work to fix it. To tell people that no, you can. That's one part. But I think it's also because genuinely you have so many things that will hit you at any point in time that when you're not structured about how you run your day, your week, your month, you're going to end up missing out on important things, focusing your attention on tiny elements, whereas you should have spent your time doing something else. So I guess those three things, which is spend time learning practical stuff, not bookish stuff, because that's where real work happens. Curiosity to learn whatever, wherever and however, and being organized.
Yeah, I have an anecdote to share on this one. So when I was a new hire, my regional manager, who was the skip level manager, he used to make us make these food journey plans, which is essentially on the Excel sheet, right? Which is your sales sheet. So it's like you map out the entire 30 days or 31 days of the coming month, and you actually put in like what you're going to do on each of those days. And then on the bottom, we used to have a summary table of like percentage time spent in market. And he used to do that for himself, and he used to ship it to all of us like, the last day of the previous month, and he used to make us do it. And then at the end of the month, you kind of tally plan versus actual. And I remember that initially it was just like this mind-boggling concept that you're planning what you're going to do 30 days in advance, right? But like you mentioned, I think it was a very simple but effective tool to hold yourself accountable, right? Like actually how many days are you spending in market?
It's just gold. Like I learned it a little late in life, but the day I learned it, I was like, man, why didn't I know about this earlier? One of the fun things about P&G is that you'll realize experiences are so similar. So when I learned it, I was like, and Anna, I did it throughout my life then. So it wasn't just when I was a band one, CAM, etc., and I became country manager and I still had a monthly plan. I knew exactly what I was doing, where I was doing, and it's such a stark reminder. It would tell you that you've spent 90% of your time sitting in meetings, especially as you grow higher. And then you're like, no, I need to change. Like, I need to figure out a way of getting more in market days in, or I'm not spending enough time talking to my team. I'm spending way too much time on meetings, the corporate killer of time. So, yeah, excellent. I'm glad that you got that.
It's amazing how simple yet powerful it is. So, one of the things that I have to ask you about, Priya, because this is something that I learned a lot from you when I was in my early years and I saw you at work, was your courage. And we haven't spoken about this, but I have to tell you this, that I think when I started out, I didn't have a lot of courage. There's this Indra Nooyi interview where she talks about, I think, the 4 C's of leadership, and she mentions things like communication. But what she said about courage was that, courage matters because it actually gives you the conviction to practice the other skills. If you have courage, then you can practice your analytical skills or your ability to influence. Otherwise, you're just going to be quiet. I'm very curious. Is this something that you had innately? Is this something that you had to cultivate? Was there ever a phase where you lost it? I've seen you fight the good fight for the right reasons for business. And I wonder if that's a muscle you develop.
I think I always had it. Maybe it's, the environment I kind of grew up in. I was at home always encouraged to voice my point of view, have a point of view, defend my point of view. Maybe my sister and I grew up that way. I think I lost it a little bit in my first year for sure. I don't think that I quite had the courage. Otherwise, nothing else can explain why I wasn't going and talking to my manager. This is post facto analysis, but that's where it is. But yeah, I mean, I think it was definitely upbringing, but I also saw a lot of benefits come out. It took effort, by the way, to sit in a room full of very senior managers and you have a point of view which is a little contrarian to whatever they are saying. It didn't come easy. Like I had, the elevated heart rate and the sweaty palms and the flushed cheeks or red ears actually. But I kept telling myself that no. If you don't agree with something, it is important that you share it, right? Like it's otherwise, like how else will you ever get past it? The PNG in work environment definitely encouraged it. If anything, you were obviously applauded for speaking your mind. There wasn't that barrier which said that don't talk, don't say stuff, especially when you were younger, for sure. When you were younger in your career, you were always encouraged to speak your mind. That helped for sure. So upbringing, then the environment around me, and then the benefit that I saw out of that approach. I saw stuff getting done because I was asking for it. Sometimes they were personal in nature, things that I needed for myself and my overall well-being. Sometimes there were business needs that were there. I then started following the principle which said that, if I don't ask, definitely the answer is no. If I ask, then at least there is a chance that somebody will say yes. It kind of worked there. But I do also believe that courage then needs to kind of mature with time, which means that you need to refine your approach for courage as you grow. I also felt that as I grew in the organization's ability to take straight talk on the face became lesser and lesser and lesser. So as a senior manager, for me to be in a room full of people and then say that, I disagree, I realized raised more eyebrows than, when I was mid or junior level executive. There it was like, oh, bright kid asking question. Here it was like, no EQ. Don't you know when to ask these questions? A few misses here and there, I kind of realized that this needs to adapt. It doesn't mean I don't ask the question. I just need to figure out a better way to ask the question, more appropriate forum to ask the questions. Ask, but refine it as you get cues to figure out what works in which scenario.
I agree with everything. It's so valuable. I think there's 2 parts to it which especially stick with me, right? One is that you mentioned that, you had the racing heartbeat and the flushing cheeks, which of course for me, having seen you in that situations, I wouldn't know. But it's heartening to hear, right? Because what it tells me is that somebody who I think is courageous, it doesn't mean they don't feel it. But you were just listening to that voice in your head, which is like, say it, still say it. And I think the point that you mentioned about the cues, because you're right. Sometimes we are in environments which encourage it. Sometimes we're in environments which don't. But you still have to find a way to be courageous, and courage can look like different things. Sometimes it's like speaking up in a meeting. Sometimes it's like following up after the meeting. Both are valid.
Yeah, absolutely. I've lost count the number of people who I have said that, that I have the racing heartbeat. I'm obviously doing a very good job of hiding it because that heartbeat is loud in my ears. Very, very loud in my ears.
Another thing that I've learned from observing you, and you've kind of mentioned this, which is like speaking up on your own behalf, is I have seen you treat work as a part of life. Like, even when I've seen you as like this successful businesswoman, I have seen you doing it along with your, all the other roles, and not just in a very typical like mother way, but I think a fulfilled person way. I'm just curious on this. How do you think about making work a part of your life? And are there some practical things that you do to practice to operate at this level sustainably, right? Because it's not easy.
We always hear work life balance, and I think very early, maybe I made that choice in my head or distinction in my head that it is integration before anything else. You spend so much time at work that if you're going to keep it compartmentalized and separate and treat it like a foreign body, then you're not likely to be able to do much with your life overall, because what happens at work translates into your mood either positively or negatively. So stuff needs to get integrated. And I think it was also because obviously as a young mother, I had no option. 5 years in, I had 2 kids already. So less than 10 years of work experience and 2 toddlers at home. I had no option but to kind of integrate stuff in several ways, whether it was, the calendars that got integrated, which said that, okay, what's happening, birthdays, anniversaries, school, doctor visit, etc., along with whatever else is there on my calendar, to more important things like how will I think about my career, because my career doesn't run in isolation. It runs with what works for us as a family unit. So I think and all the spectrum in between. And I learned this I really wish I remember the lady's name, I just don't, but she actually spoke about this integrated calendar. And this was, she was talking about a written calendar stuck on her fridge, and thankfully we have Outlook, which makes it a little easier. But I started putting everything on my calendar. In fact, a really funny incident where, I was some travel happening somewhere, and I got an invite for one of those quarterly, monthly meetings, and I forwarded it to my husband. And then my boss wrote to me, who are you sending this meeting invite to? And I didn't know up until that day that when you forward, that forward notification goes to this meeting organizer. So I was like, no, I sent it to my husband because he needs to know that I'm traveling so that he's not traveling on the same days. So, but yeah, I've always had integrated calendars because that's the only way I can make sure that I am not missing out on stuff either at work or at home. That's probably the most practical tip that I can think of integrating stuff.
Yes, absolutely. And I've been there on that, which is we have this practice as well between my husband and I of blocking each other's calendars when the other person has something. And then sometimes you forget to send a separate invite and you just habitually kind of forward.
And now with the kids all grown up, there's stuff happening. So we have a family calendar now. Our kids resisted, or at least one of them resisted for a bit. But we said that, and we have a running joke in our family, which says that if it's not on the calendar, it doesn't exist. So please don't expect us to, because everybody, and I mean, my kids are now nearly 15 and nearly 18. They're all grown up. They all have their own social life, hundreds of other things that happen. And then suddenly I realize I'm planning something. And they're like, no, we cannot come because we have something. I said, you did not put it on the calendar. I am not accountable for this stuff.
I love it. They learn calendaring and accountability
very early.
Yeah. So I'm going to take us back. We discussed kind of your early years and you shared, how the learnings from those years kind of shaped your career thereafter. I think there are kind of a couple of big milestones that a person looks for, right? Like first, it's like you want to get placed. And then when you get placed, you want to get promoted. So I'm curious, what was your first promotion experience like? Were you like the fastest in the batch? Was it later? And talk us about like how that went for you and what again did you learn?
I told you, right? Bad first year, so I was the last one to get promoted. I mean, what it came through with is that after the really terrible first year, that promotion required effort. So I had to put in a lot of effort, and I think I then kind of valued it a little bit more, and I also understood a bit more about, very early understood how promotions happen. Like if I had just naturally gotten promoted, I don't think I would have made the effort to understand how promotions happen. But when I did not get promoted in the first set of folks, or the second. So there were like three sets, I think three groups of people who got promoted. I was in the third group, me and like maybe one more person. So when I did not get promoted, I spent some time trying to understand that acha, like what is required. And I think that I kind of then understood that it is not just numbers, it's not just what you do, it's also how much do people know about what you do. So it is also your responsibility to make sure that enough decision makers are aware about the work that you did. So all really good lessons. So again, I should be thankful for having a terrible start and did a lot of good for me.
Which you can, I guess, can appreciate in hindsight way
For
more in the
sure.
moment. I guess the other piece that I want to talk about is, so of course you've spent your entire career in PNG, at least the first chapter of it, and you've recently started on like the second chapter of your career. So tell us a little bit about that. Like, what is the motivation for changing? How are you using your learnings along the way?
I never thought that I was ever going to leave PNG, and I think most people figured that I was going to be like a lifer like everyone else. But circumstances happened. The Vietnam role was fantastic, but I don't think that the professional milestones or highs were balancing out the toll that it was taking on me personally. I've always believed that my happiness is entirely in my hands, so when I'm not happy, then I'm the one who needs to make that change. And my husband calls it divorce because it felt like a painful divorce at that point in time. It was quite traumatic, one-sided, because I was the one thinking about it, that I must leave. It took me a year to make that decision, but I think it was the right decision at that point in time. I needed to do what was needed for my overall well-being. Obviously, there were parts of my corporate life that I wasn't enjoying, which is why my mental well-being was not where it should have been. But there were obviously parts that were still, a source of joy for me. And one amongst those was this entire thing of, I always loved my role as a people manager, always loved the ability to be able to get people to reach their career aspiration or whatever it is that they wanted to. I know that I like that. I realized that I'm obviously good at it because I continue to have people reach out to me even after I left PNG, and there cannot be a better testimony to to your abilities if they're still talking to you even though they don't need to. So that was a good reminder that yes, I'm good at it. And it was a bit of a chance and luck because I was talking to somebody and I didn't know that how do you become a coach, and then I suddenly met somebody who told me about the certification, ICF, etc., etc. So I went, I got trained on being a coach, which I realized is so much different from being a mentor, different from being a people manager, very different skills. And then this entire new world kind of opened up for me, and it's been an immensely fulfilling journey for me, talking to people, helping them solve for whatever it is that they're seeking a solution for. And I get to use 2 decades worth of experience. I still haven't come across so far situations that I am not able to empathize with. I guess empathy probably is the most important skill a coach should have, a mentor should have. That's what I do now, and that's how I kind of, a bit of a luck, bit of deliberate choice, landed in this new role that I have in my life.
Such a treat to watch you follow your joy. And as I hear this in this conversation, that's also a common thread, from economics to sales to now coaching. And I think I've mentioned this to you before, right? I do think that what a corporate career or what a career looks like is changing. So I'm very curious to see what you make of this, because I think it's a example for all of us, right? Like what careers can look like now.
I'm convinced now that the 30, 35, 40-year career that people used to have will look very different, because the pace at which we work now, I think there will be a small percentage of people who will still be able to sustain it, but there's going to be a large percentage of people who will not want to do that. I obviously fell in the second group.
We're going to put the empathy hat on as we head into the career clinic, which is the second part of our chat today. As I've been putting together the career starter kit, I've been talking to a lot of young professionals. I will share some situations and we would love to hear, from your experience, if you face something similar, how did you go about it, or any advice for the person in that situation. The first question is, my manager gave me feedback during appraisal, but if they would have told me before, I could have done something about it.
First, better late than never. Be appreciative of the fact that you've got feedback which is constructive in nature and is actually going to be helpful in getting you to be better version of yourself going forward. And the second one is that take it as a lesson learned, which is that it's your life, your career, and you are responsible for making sure that you get the feedback.
feedbacks is one way, the other one is updates, right? As young professionals, we need to give updates. This person says that I never know what to update my manager on. Should I let them know what I've been up to each day? I'm afraid I'm going to either give up too many details or they're going to be out of the loop. So how do I know what to inform them about and what's too much?
I think a two-step process I would suggest. The first one is that as you start working with any manager, it's very important to have what is called a working style conversation, which is that ask them that how do they like to work. And one of the aspects is updates, right? It covers not only the frequency but also the mode of updates. Some like emails, some like phone calls, some like just text me, etc., etc. So have that first, which is you set up that styles conversation with your manager to establish the working principles. And the second one is that the way that I always worked is that I kind of divided my work into three groups. The first one was, and this is after the styles conversation. So there's certain set of things that I'm very confident on, and I know that it's okay, stuff is going well. But I'd still update, tell them as an FYI, things all okay, just letting you know stuff is fine. The second would be I could do with a little bit of help. So either I'm stuck on resources or I'm stuck on a couple of ideas. I'm like, I want to just pick your brain or I want some help from you on this one. So that's the second group of things. And the third one would be where I'm like, I'm lost. I don't know what to do and I need your help. I'd like kind of bucket stuff into these three upfront in the style conversation if they're not upfront about it, saying that that is it okay if I just do this. But at the heart of all of this, and I've seen this with a lot of young people, is that why does my manager want to know? Your manager's job is to manage you. They cannot manage you if they don't know what's happening in your life. So you cannot resent them from wanting to know. And the usual instances of this frustration happens because people don't have the style conversation. And then they assume that, why should I tell you? You have to tell your manager and keep them updated. What frequency, how, and in what level of detail is your responsibility to have that conversation upfront and then stick to that drumbeat going forward. And then obviously relationships are iterative. After the manager sees a little bit of you, sees how well you are doing or not doing all that well, they will dial up or dial down to make sure that they're managing you well because they are supposed to manage you.
Point of having a working style conversation, I can swear by it. Because one is, I think in general, we don't have enough of those conversations about how we work. We just dive into it. And whenever I've tried it, it's worked wonders. So I have an anecdote on this one, which is I used to have a manager who would, if I would send him, let's say there's a deck that has to go for a meeting and I need to give feedback so I can review it. It would never come till the 11th hour after 11 follow-ups, and it was very frustrating. And then I had this conversation, and then what I realized is that this person prefers printouts. And so then our kind of go-to thing became is that every evening or whenever needed, I would give a printout on his desk and he would literally mark it on his commute. And I would have it back the next day and it became so smooth. But it would have never occurred to me to do this unless I had asked. The second thing I love in those buckets is telling the manager that I've got this. It's even the stuff that you have got, you can still give that one-line update to the manager, and if they have a question, they can follow up. Now we're going to move to another thing which is new in your life as a young professional, which is meetings. You can love them, you can hate them, but they're not going anywhere. This person says that I feel too nervous to speak in meetings, especially when I disagree with something. I know I should, but I'm just not able to. What if my idea is not good? What if my point isn't valid? So I end up not speaking up. We've talked about courage. I wonder if there's anything else to add to this.
I think the individual is doing well, which is understand the source of your nervousness. In my experience, it stems from either fear of judgment or lack of depth on the topic. The latter is easier to fix, which is just spend more time, get your numbers right, then go ahead and deliver your message the way that you'd like. The first one, which is fear of judgment, but the point is that if you don't talk, they'll still judge you. So you may as well be judged with your words to back you up. But you can almost always look at this as not as judgment, but as an improvement on to whatever plan that you're talking about. They're either going to make your plan better or they're going to make you question your thinking process or your analysis, and you're going to learn a better way of thinking. Honestly, don't see any negative coming out of it if I lose that fear of judgment. Possibly just that one minor adjustment.
Makes a ton of sense, and I think it's also the next time you can talk about how you incorporated it.
100%, exactly. This is the most common reason, the fear of judgment, of that I'm going to say something and they'll think I'm an idiot. The point is that if you had an important point and you didn't say it, they are going to think that you're an idiot post facto. So
And you'd be surprised how often that whatever you think is like a dumb point, it's on everyone's mind, right? And it opens this
exactly.
conversation, which is like, addressing the elephant in the room. So sometimes it really helps. There's a particular kind of meeting, which is the leadership review, which for a lot of people is like getting grilled
Nervous.
and nervousness.
Anxiety inducing.
So this person says that I get really anxious when I'm grilled in leadership reviews, and every month there's so much questioning, and sometimes I think I'll plan a day just to prepare for that meeting. But is there any way to make these reviews easier?
Anxiety, there's nothing wrong with it. It's natural. Be kind to yourself. Don't start to fear it because you're getting anxious. The only reason you're anxious is because you want to do well, which is okay. So first, be comfortable with the fact that there's anxiety. Now, obviously, you don't want an anxiety to get to a level where it is paralyzing you and not constructive for you. So you need to rein that in, right? I can share what worked for me, and then everybody will need to find their own one. Preparation, a day for sure. I had meticulous preparation for every single leadership discussion. Even if it was something, I'm going to be sitting in a car and talking to someone, I need to know what I'm going to talk. If it's in a meeting which is scheduled and done, I used to write the whole damn script down. Everything, comma, full stop, everything. And obviously I'm not going to be reading it, but I had it next to me either on a sheet of paper. So I wasn't even one of those who wrote those, bullet points. I wrote everything of how my words were going to be, because it allowed me first to get sharper, because if you don't practice, you end up using more words, you're not as clear in your messaging. So when you write stuff down, I found myself to be sharper in my thinking. Sometimes it sparked a question saying that no, this doesn't make sense. Like as I'm writing it, I'm like, somebody can poke holes into my theory right here. And the second one is, there is no better antidote to anxiety than preparation. You can take any example of the most famous presenters that you've ever heard of, and they'll all have one thing in common, which they'll say they practice. Whether it was Steve Jobs or anybody else who's been on a TED talk, everybody will tell you that there is no better antidote to anxiety than preparation. So if you're taking a day off, well done on you. I think you're taking the right step to get past it. And I think the third one possibly is the same one which we talked earlier, which is that get over your fear of judgment. Once you get over your fear of judgment and start looking at these reviews as a means of making your job easier, it is easier then.
Now we're switching to a topic of learning, and this is something that I think young professionals hear a lot. So what this person says is that people keep saying learning is the key to long-term career growth, but what does that actually mean? Like, how do you do it? What to learn? Where is the time? I'm working all the time, so how do you actually learn while you're working?
Let me answer the second one first, because that's a bit easier. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about learning is that learning is what we knew of in school, college, that you need to, or the dreaded sitting in a training room and somebody coming in and telling you what is the right way to do it. It has its time and place, but the bulk of adult learning happens through doing. If you're doing something meaningful, you are learning. You don't have to carve out a separate time. You learn by doing things. It's like you can't learn how to cycle or how to swim without cycling or swimming. You can keep reading books, but you'll never learn how to do it, and it doesn't change when it comes to work either. So that's the first part. 70% of your learning will happen on the job. An important project, a stretch assignment, a cross-functional project, all of those give you different skills, and they are the best ways to learn. The in-room training, room front training, online training, etc., is a minuscule, small, tiny part. 10% at best. There are obviously places where it is helpful, but I think even in those instances, books and practical experiences are significantly better than sitting into a training room and learning. There are some fantastic trainings, which then brings me to the first part of the question, which is that how do I know what to learn? Usually organizations will have a very clear definition of what kind of skills matrix are there. And if you don't have that, make it for yourself. May not be ideal, but you'll know. I mean, if you're a finance professional and who needs to do FP&A analysis, etc., you know that you need to understand a certain set of basics that are there. You're a salesperson, you need to know how to sell, you need to know how to negotiate, you need to know how to communicate well, you need to know how to write. If it exists in the organization, make yourself familiar with it, and then assess what you're doing, what you already know, what you don't know. If it is not there, then you plan yourself and then enroll your manager into it. Get inputs from them to say that, what should I add or delete into it? And then get working, because that's the best way to learn.
I have a follow-up question here, right? And I super agree that being aware of what you learn on the job and in practice, but I've sometimes found that hard to do in practice. So sometimes I find that I'm still learning from something that happened a long time ago, because now I can look at it with a better understanding of, okay, this is what that situation was all about, right? So I'm curious, is there anything that we can do to become aware of, like, in this situation, in this experience, what all can I learn from it? How do you extract the most out of an experience?
That's why, live learning or learning on the job is such an important thing, because it's a gift that keeps giving. You will continue to learn for a while, so there's nothing wrong with it. But the reason that you still remember it is because you're reflecting back. And that's the key to making any on the job stuff work for you from a learning point of view. You need to be deliberate about reflecting and saying that, okay, I'm doing this. What am I picking up? And the reflection can take multiple forms depending on what's your learning style, and you'll know that best, right? I realized this, I'd guess, somewhere in the 5-6 years of working mark. And then I started noting stuff down. Like, when I got through something and it clicked in my head, I had a little notebook and I'd make sure that I write stuff down for myself. And I continued that practice for some time. That's probably the best way. Like, a good meeting or a bad meeting, you go back and say that, okay, what worked and what did not? Note that stuff down, and that becomes a good source for you. And then if you can really, get organized about it, then it is going to unlock the next level and superpower in you. We had one PNG manager in common who was famous for doing this, right? Vivek was insanely organized about this stuff. And when I saw it, I was like, wow, I need to know how to do this, because this is like, it's reflection on steroids, because you're now classifying stuff and you know that under this topic, this is where stuff lies.
As you were saying this, there's a quote that came to mind, which is Ray Dalio, right? Who is the famous hedge fund investor. And he has a book called Principles, which is one of my favorite books. And in that, one of his principles is pain plus reflection is equal to growth. On that note, we're going to move into our last and final segment of this conversation, which is our rapid fire. So we call this fast track. And I'm going to ask you, quick, short questions about your learnings, your best practices, your tips. Shall we jump into it?
Yes, let's go.
One thing that unlocked growth for you.
My bad start at PNG. Or actually, all my bad years. The pain, as you said.
Yeah. A small habit that has made a big difference in your career.
I think just being organized. Like having a monthly, weekly plan that, the FJP version of it all. Being organized, super helpful.
The most underrated skill for somebody early in their career?
I'd say written skills. Not enough value is given to it, but very important. Whether it's an email reply that you're sending, an email that you're sending, or writing your thoughts down for a learning document or submitting a project. Being able to be precise while writing.
One piece of advice to someone starting out today.
Like I said, it's your career, you own it, and you need to make sure that you're investing in it as much as you do on any business task that is given for you. So treat it so, with the same level of importance, but most importantly, remember that you are the owner, because you are the ultimate beneficiary for it. So you need to plan for it, you need to take the action. You can't wait for other people to come and solve for your career needs or problems.
Okay, now we're going to talk about specific situations. One tip for effective meetings.
Pre-reads with a very distinctive call to action saying, what do you expect in the meeting? So a pre-reading which captures all the background data information, and then saying we will meet in the meeting and here is a decision needed, or this is just FYI, or these are the approvals needed, etc. So that you use the meeting then focused only on what you actually want done in that meeting. So that would be one. And the second one would be to be very choiceful on who you invite into the meeting. And they're linked, because only when you have clarity of what you need will you know who to invite for the meeting.
One way to make your boss's life easier.
Alignments on objectives.
Your strategy for handling tough feedback.
Remember that it's for making you better.
Yeah, it's always ascribe good intent.
Yeah, absolutely.
One question every junior employee should ask their manager.
How am I doing? What am I doing well? What am I not doing well?
And if I have to follow up and say, when is a good time to ask this? Like how frequently?
So I go back to the styles conversation. But at the bare minimum, at least once a quarter. I mean, obviously, you don't want to do it on a weekly basis. You don't want to annoy your manager. So have that styles conversation. But I think definitely once a quarter.
Your number one networking tip.
Be a giver. Networking somehow almost always starts when you need something. And I think that the biggest networking tip is that you need to develop a network before you need anything. And it also means that you need to give before you can receive. Like the other person at the other end should know, what am I getting out of talking or spending these 30 minutes with you.
One book or blog that you would recommend people read?
I think the one that I love absolutely, and it's my current favorite, I'm rereading it right now, is The First 90 Days. The stuff that we've talked, by the way, I think almost all of it is covered in some form or matter in that book. It began, I think the first edition was written with the intent of it being a guidebook for senior executives. But I think the subsequent editions have now, been written with a form saying that it's valid for everybody. So I love, the systematic approach to having a fast start anytime you start a new job role, wherever it is. So I absolutely love it. I also really like Adam Grant. Why I like it so much is because, he's on Instagram, he's on LinkedIn, and he has these one-liners, etc. And I find them so insightful. A world of wisdom in just a couple of sentences. So I really like these two.
Agree. I follow him as well, and there's always a nugget. Priya, this was a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for being so candid in sharing your experience.
First, I'm so excited about what you're putting together. I think it is so needed because the biggest jump that you make is when you start off. And if you get that right, it obviously sets you up for success. I love the fact that you're putting it together, and I had a really fun conversation. Nostalgia is always good, but this was a very interesting conversation. You got a lot out of me.
I thoroughly enjoyed it as well.
Likewise.